Alrighty, in this video we'll continue where we left off and continue to work on the integration between the master server and the region server. So at this point, we see that we can go ahead and start each server independently. If my Photon control would allow me to right-click on it, that would be great. There we go. Just had to pause for a second. And we can go ahead and I'm going to start the master server as an application. Let's go ahead and also start game instance 1 as a service. So we should see the logs here. Game server started and it's registered. So awesome. Everything is working, and I haven't yet quite figured out the issue with the delayed disconnect. That's something I'm going to have to explore a little bit later. But at this point, in our master server, we have our region server queue, which should allow us to select a game instance system, which contains the context, which contains the configuration, which should notify a client or be able to tell a client to connect to a region server. So I think in this video what we're going to do is we are going to write the code that allows a person to begin a game. So the way we've done this so far is we can choose a user to log in as, blah, 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 give it a second to spin up, and we can create a lobby and we can start the game, but we get a fatal error because we have not implemented that yet. So what I want to do is I want to implement the bit of code that's going to be located in the BuzzMMO server master systems game lobby system in his begin game. So the begin game method is deferred, and it's going to call in to our game lobby class. And so we have a couple to-dos here. So we don't have lobby state yet, or status rather. Remember, a lobby status can be active, starting game, or destroyed. So what we need to do is in our game lobby, when we begin a game, we need to notify, ask the region server queue for an available region server, have the region server start the simulation on its process, and then notify the master server when that process was successful. And if it was, then the master server is going to tell the clients which server was connected. So I do believe we have in our RPC here in systems.master in our game lobby system, I do believe we have a on game started that has the game ID, the game server connection, and the level name. I think for I think we won't worry about that just yet, the game ID. But in a coming video, what we're going to do is we're going to actually hook the concept of a game into the database. So games are tracked, and then games will get a auto-incremented ID, and when they get an auto-incremented ID, that will be the game ID. Because when we connect to a game server, we need a game ID. And in the future, we'll add some security where we'll have like a special token that allows that client to connect to that particular game. Because obviously we don't want to have the region servers allowing any client to join any game. That would be kind of silly. We want to make sure that they were previously in the lobby. But that'll be handled later. For now, what we need to do is go into the game lobby and create some sort of begin game. So if we go into the game lobby system, let's start here. Let's start on the begin game method, which is called by the client. This code already works. And what we're going to do is say return lobby.begin game. So lobby.begin game is going to return a deferred so that we get a response back to the client. I'm going to alt enter this, so that we now have a public deferred begin game on our lobby. I do want to move this up to, how about underneath destroy? Now what I want to do here is I want to return fiber.enqueueDeferred. And we want to do a couple checks here. I want to make sure that the player that is trying to begin the game is the owner. Actually, what I'll do here is in the game lobby system, I'm going to pass in the game lobby system into the lobby begin game so it knows which game lobby system was responsible for that. Now, you could say that we are really tightly coupling the game lobby class with the game lobby system, and you'd be right. We could certainly break out these things into interfaces, which would make this code a little bit more testable. But unfortunately, to get things moving as quickly as possible, we haven't been doing nearly as much testing as I would like. But anyway, so we have lobby.begin game this. And in begin game, I'm going to take in a game lobby system called player. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if I'm going to do if player does not equal null and player does not equal owner. Then return deferred.fail. Only owners can start the game. And of course, at the end, we'll put in a return deferred.success here, just temporarily, so Resharper starts freaking out at trying to do the type inference of which particular overload of enqueued deferred that we're using. So we have that. So now what do we need to do? We need to ensure the lobby status. So to do ensure lobby status. And at this point, we are going to be beginning the game. When we're beginning the game, we don't want to allow things like, let's see. We don't want to allow things like starting a, adding a player, removing a player, destroying. We want to keep all that stuff. That stuff that could happen. We don't want a begin game to start and then the client to immediately send a destroy lobby while the game has started. So that's what we're going to use the status for. So our status, let's look at this. Our status is just a public property. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say status equals lobby status dot starting game. And then I'm going to notify everybody of the new lobby status. So what I can do here is I can do, remember our underscore proxy, which this proxy will send this notification to every single person in the lobby. And I'll say on lobby updated, new lobby details, and I'll specify the ID as our ID, and I'll specify the status as our status. So we're doing that. I'm wondering, though, if I should actually put this code right here that notifies all of the players in the lobby that our status is updated. I'm wondering if I should put that as a setter in the status, and I think actually I will. I'm going to take this, I'm going to remove that, and then I'm going to jump into the status property, and I'm going to hit Alt-Enter and say toProperty with backing field. So now we have a property with backing field, and so far it looks pretty straightforward, but on our private set, I'm going to say proxy on lobby updated, and I'm going to pass in the status. In fact, we can probably do this with virtually all of our things. I'm not going to worry about the name one, though. But the status I will. So, well, to be consistent, we might also want to do it with the name. And the owner. Yeah, consistency would be good here. So, for the name, let's go ahead and make this a toProperty with backing field. And what this is going to do is this is going to do our proxy on lobby updated. The downside to this is we're no longer batching our lobby details updating. The upside to this is it will ensure a more consistent API with our private variables here. So actually no, I have a better idea. So if we just set the name or if we just set the status, it will send this notification, right? But if we access name directly, we can change the name without setting the notification. Then we can send a notification that both the owner and the name changed. So we only send one packet each to each player. I think I'm going to do that. So our name and status, these properties, if you set them, they'll notify people. But down here, instead of doing the property name equals, I'm going to do the underscore name equals. So this will not result in a notification being sent out, and then our on lobby update will be sent as well. We have to make sure we set the ID to ID. I don't know why I missed that. Because I do believe the ID is always sent, no matter what. Yeah, the ID is always sent, then the changed field is sent. So, yeah, so now we can change the name or the status just by setting the property, and that'll notify everyone. So now it's a little bit more consistent. So with that out of the way, we can now come back up to our begin game code. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, now that we're dealing with the status, I'm going to go ahead and write another private member. I'm going to write a private member, private void, ensure lobby active, or ensure is active. And I'm going to say if status does not equal lobby status dot active, then throw new RPC exception lobby is currently, and then we'll just pass in the status. Or can't complete operation while lobby is status. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to, on our destroy, we can now fix this to-do. I can say ensure is active. So that will make it, well, actually, we'll ensure is active before we even do the player check. So that'll throw that RPC exception if the lobby is currently not active. And then in our destroy internal, we'll also, we already do that. We say status equals lobby destroyed. Though I wonder if, I think actually it might be cool to do this before, because now status equals lobby destroyed will send a notification to all the players. I think before we destroy the game lobby system and each one of the players that are connected to the lobby, I think it might be a good idea to first send them a status that the lobby has become destroyed, allowing the UI to do something different depending on the circumstances in which it was destroyed. Anyway, so begin game, status equals starting game. So what I want to do here is I want to tell the game lobby queue that we want to select a game server and have that game server begin the simulation. So I think we need to have a reference to our lobby queue, which we do, region server queue game servers. So what we can do here is I'm going to say return game servers dot begin game, and now we have an interesting design decision to make here. We need to inform the game server of all of the lobby's parameters. We need to tell it everything about the lobby. We need to tell it the lobby ID. We need to give it all the players. We need to say which team and which hero each player is. So now we need to figure out a data structure that can contain all the parameters for a game that can be passed around, so that even the players can get notified of all those parameters. So I'm thinking that we need another structure that is going to be located in probably our Buzz MMO base components that describes a game. So we already have a game lobby player detail that has its name, its team, and its hero. And its ID, which the ID is going to, if I'm not mistaken, the ID is going to be the player ID. Which, if I can remind myself, okay, yeah, the ID is going to be the player ID. So we already have a game lobby player details. And now we need another structure that describes the entirety of a game. So it describes all of the game lobby players that are in the game, as well as whatever additional game parameters were set, like what maps were chosen or whatever. Obviously, right now we don't have any of those options. So we need another structure to describe the game. So let's go ahead and create a game parameters class. I think that's a good enough name for it. It's going to be iCustomSerializer. And the game parameters is going to have a public IEnumerable of game lobby player details. And it's also our lobby details, because we can also send things like our the owner of the lobby, the player count, the name of the lobby, and the all that stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and do lobby details as well in our game parameters. Or should I? Should I even reference the lobby or the concept of the lobby from within this? Does the lobby really have anything to do with the game? Actually, I'm going to not do that for now. Okay, so for this, we're going to go ahead and create a constructor that takes in a list of games or players. And really, that's all the information that we have for a game being started is from this. And we'll also create a default constructor so it can be deserialized. For saving, I'm simply going to do serializer, and I'm going to write an object, passing in our binary writer and our IEnumerable of game lobby player details. Actually, what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to go ahead and write a generic version of the serializer write object method. And I'm going to do so as an extension method. Because right now our serializer write object method is used for a non-statically typed scenario. And so what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to write a statically typed version of it, but I'm going to write it as an extension method that's written in terms of this. That's a really cool thing about extension methods, because is that we can attach our attach actual methods with actual functionality to interfaces, which is cool. So in my extensions namespace in BuzzMMO base, I'm going to write serializer extensions. And it's going to have to be a static class. And I'm going to do a public static void write object t with a this iSerializer that and a t value. And then I'm simply going to do, or whoops, we'll also need our binary writer, of course. We need to know what to write it in. And then I'll do that write object writer type of t followed by value. And I'll also do a public static t read object of t with an iSerializer that and a binary reader of reader, which will simply return cast to t that read object reader type of t. So yeah, now we have generic forms of these methods, so we don't have to worry about passing in the type of anymore. So that just cleans up our code a little bit. So now I can come back into game parameters, and I'm going to say serializer write object, and I'm going to go ahead and import that namespace. So I'm going to hit Alt Shift Space and then enter, which will import the BuzzMMO base extensions namespace. And I'll say write object writer and then player details, and it'll all just magically work. Because remember, our actual, this is the reason why my custom serializer accepts an iSerializer, because our iSerializer, our binary serializer, actually understands IEnumerables. So we don't have to do any nasty IEnumerable garbage here. We can simply just reuse our serializer to write that object. And then for loading, we'll simply do player details equals serializer read object. And for read object, we will have to pass in an actual type. It won't be able to generically infer this. See, if I do this, it's going to yell at me that it can't generically infer this. And that's an unfortunate thing about C#, where it can't generically infer the type arguments based off of the where it's assigned to. But we can just put in here IEnumerable of game lobby player details. And there we go. So far that's our game parameters. In the future we'll do something more interesting, I suppose. But with that, what we can do now is we can go into our BuzzMMO server master, into our game lobby, and now we can finish this code here where we say return game servers.begin game. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and write the prototype for this method, or the stub for this method. Then I'm going to come back and finish this file. So let's jump into our region server queue, and we're going to have a public void begin game with a game parameters. So this will have all of the information about the game that's needed in order to begin it. And this is actually not going to be a public void, it's going to be a public deferred. Now, it's actually going to be a public deferred of it, because the ID of the game IDs are going to be integers, and the ID is not going to be figured out until the region server gets the notification to begin the game, creates a record in the database, and then receives the auto-incremented ID. So with that stub out of the way, of course it's not going to compile, but now we can finish our game lobby. So we're going to do game servers begin game, and I'm going to say new game lobby parameters, or sorry, game parameters. And for game parameters, I'm simply going to do players dot select, t goes into t dot. Okay, we do need to say, I'm going to break this. This is going to get really ugly really fast. So I'm going to say var players equals players.select. T goes into new game lobby player details. Don't I already do this like a million times somewhere else? I do. I don't like that. I don't like that repetition here. You know what I want to do? I think what I'm going to do here is on the game lobby system itself, I'm going to write a property that will construct a game lobby player details object, and that'll clean up our code. So let's take another quick detour into game lobby system. And what I'm going to do here is create a public game lobby player details, And that's simply going to return a new game lobby player details with our ID being context user details ID. Our username, our name will be context user details username. Our game team will be team, and our game hero will be hero. So, and yes, I'm using the C#6 syntax for creating this getter. Okay, so now jumping back into the game lobby, I can now change this code where I can simply say, I don't even need this anymore. I can completely delete this and say proxy onPlayer entered will be system.details. And then for this, I don't need this anymore. I can simply say proxy onPlayer entered other player.details to notify the player of all the other details. And now what I can do is notify player details updated. Where is this invoked from? This is invoked from here, where details... Okay, that's fine. And then what I'm going to do is come down here to where we get our players, and we're simply going to say, or get our parameters. I'm going to say var parameters equals new game parameters, and I'm going to pass in players.select. T goes into T details. And then I can now change this to begin game parameters. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say dot on success, def goes into, and then I'm going to say, so this is what happens when there was a success. I'm going to say proxy dot, ooh, we'll actually need even more details, won't we? We need the game server's begin game deferred to return information about the Photon connection as well as the ID of the game that was created. So we need another structure, and that structure is going to contain that information. Okay, so let's go ahead and create that structure. Thinking. Okay, so back in BuzzMMO base components, we have, in Systems Master, we have a game lobby system where onGameStarter gets a game ID and a Photon server connection. We actually need both of these parameters to be put into one object so we can pass it along with a deferred. So to do that, let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and say, so we already have game parameters. Let's do game instance. Game instance will refer to an actual instance of a game. So I'm going to do game instance will be an custom serializer, and he's going to have a public int game ID, or how about just ID? Get private set, and he's also going to have a public Photon server connection server. And then we're going to create a constructor, an empty default constructor, and then we're going to create another constructor that takes in both of those. To save it, we're simply going to say server save writer serializer. Well, let's do ID first. ID equals, or sorry, writer write ID. And then for load, we'll say ID equals reader read int 32. And then we'll say server equals serializer dot read object reader, or we'll do read object, we'll use our generic form of read object, and it'll be of Photon server connection. Maybe to make this a little less lopsided, I'll use the serializer for this too. Serializer write object, passing in our writer and our server. Okay, so now we have our serialization logic there. So now, in our game server queue, I'm going to have it so that instead of, well, while we're in components, I'm going to jump back into game lobby system, and I'm going to replace both of these with a game instance game. Oh, and we also have the level name. Let's also, I'm going to go ahead and take this level name, and I'm going to merge it into game instance. So on game instance, I'm going to come here and I'm going to say public string level name, because I want to have like a playlist of sorts where the region server is actually going to determine the level that gets started. So then we'll make sure we write it, write level name, and then we make sure we read it. Level name equals reader read string. Okay. So that's our save and that's our load for our game instance. We now have a data structure that contains all the information about a game that's required to join it. And it'll also contain other parameters about the game, and so on. So now, or whatever wasn't determined when we started the game. So with a combination of game parameters and game instance, we should be able to recreate all of the important information on our game itself. So, which is actually, I think what I'm going to do is on game started, game instance game, and also game per, well, should I do that? I think I will. Game parameters. Because these two structures contain all the information, like I said, required by the client in order to reconstruct the game. So we know all the game parameters, all the game settings, and all, like time limits and stuff like that. And then we also have the game instance, which is the information needed to connect to the proper server. So now we can go back to the region server queue, and instead of returning an integer, it's going to return a game instance. Then, in the game lobby system, or in the game lobby class, I'm going to say game servers begin game parameters. Then on success, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say proxy dot game started with the game instance of def.value or def.result, which is returned by the the region server, and then the parameters that were sent in. And then I'm going to go ahead and destroy internal. Well, actually, for this, I'll have to open up a fiber. So I'll do fiber in queue. Well, let's think here. Actually, we'll do on success, on game started. Then fiber in queue deferred. Destroy internal. And before that, we'll do an on fail. Def goes into proxy on game failed to start. Def error. And we don't need multi-line statements here. So this actually does a whole lot of stuff right here in just this little bit of code. So we tell the game server queue to begin our game given these parameters. If it succeeds, we notify each one of our players that the game started. If it fails, we notify each one of our players that the game failed. Then, if it succeeds, which I believe then does it on success, yes it does. If it succeeds, then we in queue deferred, so we get back on our synchronization context. Remember, this isn't necessarily going to be on our synchronization context. This isn't going to be on our fiber. So we need to re-enqueue a deferred that will destroy internal, which we don't even need to provide those parentheses even. Call is ambiguous. Well, whatever. Don't care. At least this works. That's weird. Anyway, I don't want to bother figuring that out. So now I'm going to go into our region server queue, and on begin game, I'm simply going to return new game instance, passing an ID of 12, level name of bleh, and a Photon connection of new Photon server connection, whoa, and hey. Or whoops, it's going to be return deferred.success of this. And then I'm going to hit F6 and do a build. So I'm just pretending that we're starting a game. We're not really starting a game yet. And just to make sure that all of our structures and our serialization works. So now I'm going to jump back into client. And on client, I'm going to go into our system's game lobby system. And you'll see we already get an error because I changed the signature. So I'm going to hit Alt-Enter to implement the missing members, which is on game started. And now this on game started is no longer needed. So on game failed to start, what I want to do is I want to show an error, which I'm going to be able to get through from my context, prefabs, instantiate, alert dialog, set title, can't start game, set message, error, set can dismissed, true. And then on game started, I'm just going to debug log game started on parameters, or sorry, on game server address. And make sure that builds. And now I'm going to come into Unity. And I'm going to hit play. Eventually. Once it lets me. Please. Thank you. And then I'm going to log in as admin, create lobby, and I'm going to hit start. Game started on whoa. Now, not only did the game start, but the lobby did get destroyed. So all of our code works. And with that, we will see you guys in the next video. In the next video, we're actually going to implement this begin game method. I still think it's so cool with this deferred API, where in my game lobby, I can write this code, this asynchronous code that otherwise would be a real pain. Ooh, there is a bug. On fail should reset the status back to lobby status dot active. So if it fails, we set it back to active. But anyway, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and move on to the next video, and we'll see you guys then.